I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your councillor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hi everyone, great to have you with us again for the weekly TGU, where we look at all things governance and local government news from the week that was. The program is brought to you by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, and it's our flagship VLGA Connect program. Great to have you with us. And joining me today, let me firstly say welcome back to Julie Reid from Julie A. Reid and Associates. Good to have you here, Julie.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be back. Sorry about that. I've had a really busy week. I'm doing a lot of work out at Yarra City Council at the moment, so big shout out to Yarra City.
Excellent. Good to have you back with us. And Tony Rownick, of course, from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, our terrific sponsors, joins me as well. Hi, Tony.
G'day, Chris. Good to have you back, Julie. We missed you last week. Didn't quite go off the rails, did it, Chris? But yeah,
not quite, but awkward silence, trying to think of something to say to each other without Julie here. No, it was all good. But one thing that the bone that I have to pick every now and then with the gods of local government communications. No sooner had we stopped recording and sent it through to post-production that we discovered that the Geelong City Council had announced the appointment of its CEO, which we spoke at some length, Tony, about, thinking it was imminent, not realising it was as imminent as it was. But it's out there now.
Absolutely. I did see your LinkedIn post when you put the podcast up saying, we'll talk about that next week. And yes, so congrats to Ali Wasty, who's coming across from Bass Coast Shire after 4.5 years there. Walking into a really difficult set of circumstances at Geelong,
One can only assume, Tony, that Ali loves a challenge.
Yes. Yeah, I think the Geelong Advertiser wrote a story and said that she was a diplomacy specialist because she's got a master's in diplomacy. Yeah. I'm not sure whether they were trying to sort of what point they were trying to make there, but clearly there's been, financial constraints on Geelong that's caused them, cutting of various services. I think the recent budget announcement included some cuts to some staffing there in the community development space. There's naturally some sort of angst in the community. Library closures was one of the issues. And then this is all in the background of some concerns being raised about probity around appointments of senior officers. Whilst there's been no sort of determinations in that regard, that would, of course, have some impact on staff morale. So, yeah, really big task Ali's walked into, but, great credentials, City of Melbourne, I think at Yarra prior to Bass Coast.
Yarra Rangers, as a director, and then Bass Coast. I did a timeline of that process of about 10 months on the Local Government News Roundup podcast. That's the edition from last weekend, if anyone wants to check it out. Just to remind people of all the different steps and the halts in the process that happened during that torturous time, which was all then fed by lots of media speculation, which never really helps. Right up to the last minute, there was lots of media speculation. I noticed, I think the tip that the paper made a week or so before the announcement about who the two left in the process were was off the mark, ultimately. So they don't always get it right when they have their well-placed sources, do they?
Certainly not.
Julie, I don't know if you know Ali. I've had a bit to do with Ali. She's definitely a, how do I say this, sort of a front, best foot forward sort of leader, doesn't shy away from tackling issues, has done some firsts down there in Bass Coast around equity, gender equity, and even the way that local sporting groups receive support from councils to make sure that they are ticking those gender equity boxes and moving it forward, more than ticking the boxes. That's probably a poor choice of words. So I think a really interesting appointment, and I'm sure she's up for the challenge.
Yeah, I would agree, Chris. She's a great operator, and like you said, she's achieved so much down at Bass Coast. The staff seem to really value her down there, so I think that she probably comes with that sort of people focus that is potentially needed at Geelong. There's been obviously some sensitive issues down at Geelong, and people are probably feeling it, I would imagine. So I think to have her at the helm, caring about people and bringing that sort of sense of achievement and setting some really maybe some high bars to jump might be a good thing, but at the same time caring for those people and making sure that they feel that their contribution is valued. So I think she'll bring a great shift and change to Geelong, which I'm really, really pleased about. I'm feeling for Bass Coast. They've got used to her now being there for 4.5 years. Now they've got to go through change, and we now have another CEO appointment to watch very closely.
Yes,
Chris.
we do. Yeah, we've got two. We've got two on the list now. So that's what happens when one CEO goes to another council. We get this this domino effect, don't we? So Ali had signed a new 5-year contract just last year at Bass Coast. So I know that they are very disappointed to be losing her, and they have said that they will start the process to replace or find a replacement immediately and appoint an interim leader. The other thing that happened with Ali last year is she took on the role of the chair of Alpine Resorts Victoria, which is the new body that's taken over from all of those separate boards that were in place for the resorts in the north and the south of the state. I've seen no commentary yet on whether she plans to maintain that role, but she's got a big job at Geelong, so she's probably thinking very carefully about those other responsibilities and whether she can maintain them.
Oh, look, I think she's got great capability, Chris. So no doubt she will just plough on and do a great job of both.
Yeah, well, I'm sure she's certainly capable of doing that. Now, also on Geelong news, they did pass their contentious budget this week. They did find some more money for libraries so that hopefully library hours can be maintained, and some more money for aquatic centres, and that ultimately went through this week. A new councillor on board now after the countback, and Tony, it was the predicted outcome with Sarah Hathaway, who's been widely described as a socialist, making her way onto the council.
Yeah, wears those socialist views, quite openly. In fact, literally, if you looked at the LinkedIn photo on the council's LinkedIn page, where the Mayor Trent Sullivan was, congratulating her, shaking her hand, she was wearing the Socialist Alliance T-shirt. So, she has come out publicly in the media talking about, wanting to restore funding to her ward, wanting to see council providing more financial support for some of these grassroots initiatives in the community. So it would seem to be moving, in a direction that's perhaps different to council's kind of belt tightening approach in recent times. So again, just adds to the challenges, I think, for that the council as a political organisation and as more broadly for the administration in terms of moving forward. I think going to be really a council that we'll be watching as it sort of navigates through the next 12 months.
So that vacancy was created by the resignation of Kylie Grisbeck, one of the Windermere ward councillors who stepped down a few weeks ago, and a former deputy mayor. One would hope it's settled now in the lead up to elections next year, but let's see. There's been no shortage of councillors stepping aside in this term, and another was the deputy mayor at Queenscliffe, Fleur Hewitt, who has now been replaced duly by Rob Minty. Robert Minty is a former Queenscliffe councillor, back for another go on that team of 5.
Yes, that's right, Chris. And interesting that this is a borough with only a 5-person council. So you've got to think about it from the point of view of one new person comes in where you've only got 5 councillors. It's going to have a big difference, a big change. Obviously, he's got experience, which helps, but it is a big change, obviously, for the council. It'll be interesting to see what happens to the council now and where it goes with some of its decision making. I think the one thing that I'm reflecting on, I suppose, with all of these changes, and I know we've spoken about this before, is, you know, who's providing the support and the transition for these councillors back into a council group which is about to go into the final year of their term. You know, this is where it's going to be really important, probably not so much for Rob Minty, but for the new councillor at Geelong, is that, you know, that training, understanding the role of a councillor, understanding what the powers are that they've got as an individual, which are not much, as you know, and how they need to potentially work with the group, what's expected of them, what is the code of conduct, all that kind of stuff that they need to get up to speed with really, really quickly at the same time as making decisions. We know how hard it is for councils, even just getting their heads around the planning space, you know, how they come in and they're making decisions on planning applications and on, you know, major future, you know, planning scheme changes and lots of really complex issues in the planning space without really any training. So yeah, look, that's just the point that I want to make, is that it can be a really challenging time, I suppose, for those groups, and quite demanding for the organisation, particularly the CEO.
Yeah, I think you've been thinking about that for a week since you heard Tony and I talk about some councillors calling for better governance training last week, and spot on, completely agree with everything you just said, and even more so in the case of Queenscliffe with a councillor coming in, whether they've got experience or not. As you say, last year of the council term, I think it's the hardest year they get. Excuse me, councillors, but you do, as groups, you tend to get a bit ratty in that last year of a 4-year term. Because, you know, you're at the point of delivering on your legacy, but you're also got one eye on the future if you're planning to run again, and it becomes a bit more of a political environment if it wasn't already. And that's my point about Queenscliffe, because this week we've had one of those councillors there bring basically a no confidence motion to the council and called for the local government minister to appoint municipal monitors over a long list of concerns that the councillor, Donnie Grigor, said came from residents about cost overruns with projects and delays, a whole range of issues there, Tony, that ultimately led to the council not voting up that no confidence motion. It was lost, I understand, 3 votes to 1, because I don't think the new council has been able to take a seat at the table yet. But that's not a great thing to be dealing with.
Yeah, I did see that. I did actually watch that meeting online on Wednesday night, and as you say, a long list, about 30 concerns that Councillor Grigor included in his motion, essentially saying that there was, all these individual concerns were evidencing some non-compliance with council's own community engagement policies. As you say, the motion didn't get up. I was interested to hear, some of the other speakers. The mayor, Isabel Tolhurst's comments. I mean, she noted that a monitor would cost council $1,200 to $1,500 per day. That's a cost to the council, even though it's they're appointed by the local government minister. She pointed out that there are various other mechanisms available to councillors who want to believe council's going off track, who want to redirect council's focus, things like, asking questions, calling for councillor briefings, holding community forums, even reallocating resources internally in council towards different priorities, which are all sort of mechanisms that are short of, calling for an external bureaucrat, as she described it, coming in and, taking over at a great cost to council. I noted that the mayor did offer to meet with people who were behind this notice of motion and to discuss any particular concerns they had. And you mentioned Rob Minty, that new councillor, or that returning councillor. He gave an interesting written speech. It's quite critical of, that the level of invective directed towards councillors and council staff. Pointed out that it's quite easy for people in the community who choose not to run for council to then, call on councillors to be deposed, and sort of really, I think, called for a more sort of a more balanced and courteous sort of discourse. As you say, the motion didn't get up. It was clear, the camera didn't show the gallery, but it was clear that Councillor Gregor there were a number of people in the gallery who were quite supportive of his notice of motion. And as you say, lead up to a council election, there's clearly a level of concern in the community, at least, that Councillor Gregor is talking to. And let's hope that councillors can engage with those residents and see if some sort of resolution can be met over the next several months, rather than just a constant sort of call for a deposing of councillors.
One thing I did pick up, and I didn't get to watch the whole meeting, Tony, but one thing I did, and by the way, I thought Mayor Tolhurst managed that meeting exceptionally well from what
She actually seconded the motion for the purposes of debate, and I thought that was quite a gesture. Let's not shut this down. Let's have the debate.
Yeah, otherwise it would lapse, wouldn't it, without a seconder? But there was a question at one point about, and some confusion about, the appointment of municipal monitors, which, I was watching it. Obviously, it was the morning after, and I just wanted to be there to say, hang on, you got the wrong end of the stick here. So there was some confusion about who can appoint the monitor, and it's correct that the local government minister is who appoints municipal monitors. That's totally different to the local government inspectorate deciding it wants to go in and conduct an investigation if it believes there is cause to.
Absolutely. And I think there was some confusion there. And I think the council, the advice that councillors were receiving for the council officers was quite correct, that under section 179, it's the local government minister who has that ability to appoint a monitor. There are sections in the Act that certainly give the Chief Municipal Inspector great powers in terms of coming in and investigating. But I think perhaps for at least one of the councillors maybe, and some of the community, that might have been confusing those local government inspectorate powers with an ability to appoint a monitor. I don't believe the Chief Municipal Inspector has that power. That's solely the purview of the local government minister.
So I was seeing it as someone was receiving some bad advice in the background there, but it might be, and I'm not talking about the council, external too, but it might have just been confusion along those lines. Anything you want to add to that, Julie, before we move on?
Yeah, look, Chris, I think it's really interesting this time, as you say, as you've mentioned, going into the election next year. This is when the community are going to come out and start to push to say, what have you achieved? What is, how come these things are falling behind, etc., and start to call councillors to account probably more rigorously. So not surprising to see this. I think you're right. I think there needs to be a level of communication, which is not only from the councillors, but from the organisation about the status of some of these. Look, just this motion alone will be in the line of sight of the department. The department will see this and will start to maybe question what's going on down at Queenscliffe. Are there any issues? Even though it hasn't been supported by the council, it will still be noticed. So I think it's really important now that the council demonstrates how they're going to talk to the community about these issues, how they're going to resolve some of this. There could be some very, very good reasons why these things have been held up. Look, I've got to say, Queenscliffe are a tiny borough and they offer over 100 services, and it's obviously quite challenging to deliver on everything, but most important thing is communication, I think, in circumstances like this. And so if they can then now engage with those people and start to unpack some of this, it might actually help the situation. I agree with you. I don't know whether or not, a monitor is kind of warranted at this stage. We don't know what's going on inside, but it will be monitored by the department.
That's really good insight, Julie. And you've reminded me of a time when I was CEO at Hobson's Bay, when there were a couple of things happening politically, and the phone rang one day and it was someone within the department at local government of Victoria saying, we see what's happening there. Can you fill us in a bit more? They do observe and monitor in a very loose sense what's happening around the sector, so that there's no surprises, particularly if something comes across the desk of the minister. So to all those folks working in councils out there, don't be under any illusions that these things aren't being noticed.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julie. While we're in the southwest, no, actually, I just want to duck away to Strathbogie while we're talking about councillors resigning and monitors, etc. As we know, there's a monitor in place at Strathbogie, the second one this term. That term, I think, is just for 3 months till around mid-August. But a councillor has resigned this past week. The funny side of this, if there is a funny side, is some wags on social media started posting things. D. Andrews resigns. Technically, that's correct, but it's not the D. Andrews people thought it was. It's David Andrews, the councillor at Strathbogie, who is no longer a councillor at Strathbogie. Did either of you see any of that? It did make me chuckle.
Very cheeky, Chris.
It was very, very cheeky. But the serious side of it is, of course, this councillor came in on a countback back in September 2021, hasn't seen the term out, has stepped aside. Very little has been said as to why. So we're only drawing our own conclusions, and whether it's related to the fact that the council's under a monitor again or not is, purely conjecture on our part. Any thoughts, Tony?
Yeah, look, I don't know the background. As you say, Peter Stevenson is the recently appointed second monitor in there on a fairly short appointment, and be interesting to see what comes out of his report, which might reflect on some of these this recent resignation as well.
Yes, good point. All right. So before we leave the southwest, there's an arbiter decision that's gone up, and we missed this one. We didn't realise this was happening at Golden Plains. This is an issue that was brought by one councillor against another, alleging breach of code of conduct, etc. You've had a look at this. Anything to learn from this particular decision, Tony?
Yeah, I think so. So as you say, this was brought by Councillor Gavin Gamble, the current deputy mayor, former mayor there at Golden Plains, headquartered at Bannockburn, as you say, just out of Geelong, against Councillor Les Rowe, alleging breaches of the standards of conduct. Louise Hill was the arbiter who made the determination. She's the same arbiter who dealt with the Glenelg Shire Council case late last year, the councillor rocking up to meetings in dressing gown.
Yes.
There's a statement. She looked at 5 incidents that were complained of. There was one finding of misconduct, and what that related to was a response by Councillor Rowe, a reply or response to councillors and the CEO, so a response to the CEO that other councillors were copied into. The CEO, Eric Braslis, had sent an email to councillors informing them about that Ballarat City Council had determined to elect a deputy mayor. That was something I think that was under consideration at Golden Plains. Would they do the same? The response from Councillor Rowe used the words, so please keep your snout out of the trough and concentrate on fixing customer service. Councillor Gamble said that was that response was rude and disrespectful towards the CEO. Councillor Rowe said, well, that's my blunt farmer manner, the normal way that I communicate. Said, he thought the CEO had overstepped the mark. The CEO should be, open inverted commas, concerned about his own affairs. Now, the arbiter found the language was derogatory and disrespectful and didn't meet the required standards of conduct. Councillor Rowe said that what he meant by those words, keeping your snout out of the trough, was mind your own business. That's not the normal meaning attributed to those words, but
well, no. Hands up who thinks that's what snouts in the trough means. No hands going up.
As you say, typically it means taking a personal, especially a financial advantage from a situation, doesn't it? But yes, the arbiter found that there'd been a failure to treat the CEO with courtesy and respect. And in terms of, the implications, for me, it's saying, look, none of us can just bring our own style of speaking or our own approach to every forum or context without filtering it. We have to you know, I'm on a train in the morning. There's lots of, you know, adolescent kids, you know, they often use profanities, you know, in the one sentence, it's a noun, a verb, and an adjective, isn't it? But I'm sure they get to class, and when they're talking to the teacher, they're probably a bit more circumspect, or when they're at home, or if they've got a job. And we all know that you've got to moderate your way of speaking for, you know, to be mindful of being courteous towards others, and saying, you know, that's just the way I talk isn't going to cut it. Look, there are other matters considered by the arbiter. There was a mayoral election conversation where Councillor Gamble said that Councillor Rowe had said, look, you know, if you don't do this my way, then I'll talk to other members of the Greens party and get you disendorsed. Now, there were different recollections of that conversation. There were no witnesses, no misconduct found. There was also a complaint about a failure to, you know, applaud, to clap after the Councillor Gamble had been elected as deputy mayor last year. There was video recording of that meeting. Some councillors did clap, others didn't. It wasn't seen as being disrespect. I suppose if, you know, I'm not speculating now, but I suppose if a councillor had have, you know, expressed disgust, hissed, sworn, that sort of thing, that might have been misconduct. There was also some consideration of a councillor briefing session where, in an aside, Councillor Gamble alleges, and I think that both councillors agreed that a conversation along these lines had occurred, that Councillor Rowe said, look, if you move to defer this tender for repair of a bridge, then you can forget about getting any support for your bicycle trails, or, you know, your bike paths, porridge projects. Councillor Gamble said he felt that that was a threatening and coercive conversation. Again, no witnesses, and the finding was that, you know, it's a usual part of the political process that there's deals done often, and the finding was that there wasn't evidence of a physical or verbal threat. So, you know, I think it's a useful decision in terms of thinking about the language used towards the CEO, and a level of disrespect shown in the language used towards the CEO, and mindful that there would have been opportunities for Councillor Rowe to withdraw, to provide an apology in the lead up, but that didn't occur. And I think that that's potentially one of the explainers for, you know, a finding of misconduct and a requirement now that he go out and provide a written apology to the CEO.
Which we assume has occurred, was meant to be done by the 23rd of May. This decision's just recently gone up, I think, on the LGV website. Thanks for that summary, Tony. You know, my first read of it was, disrespectful language. I should mention Eric Braslis is a regular listener, watcher of this program. First time I think he's made the news. So there you go, Eric. We worked together at a couple of councils over the years. But the rest of it seemed pretty low level, and that's what Louise determined ultimately. Julie, your thoughts?
Yeah, Chris, look, a simple apology at the time would have avoided potentially all of this. Again, all the resources, all the time that's spent in, you know, having an arbiter at the table. You know, it seems to me to be such a shame that it's ended up down this track. It's really clear that evidence is required in these kind of cases, and so, you know, when you're bringing these complaints to ask for an arbiter to be appointed, you need to have evidence. So without evidence, it's really probably not going to cut it. But in this case, it was in writing, you know, and so, you know, but just a simple apology might have just stopped it at that point. Instead, we've now got this very public report. We're having this discussion about the conduct of councillors. The one positive thing about all of these arbiter reports is that now we're openly discussing these behaviours that are unacceptable, whereas probably, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, we weren't openly discussing these behaviours. So great from that point of view. They're in the public eye. They're in the council report. People in the community can see what's going on. So again, very transparent in the sense that they are reported to council and people can see the kind of behaviours that's going on, you know, potentially behind closed doors. So, you know, there's pros and cons.
Let's hope that that openness about those processes is a step in the right direction. The cynic in me says that the people who need to be part of those discussions and understanding those issues aren't actually sitting at the table. They're off doing other things. But that may be just me getting a bit too cynical in my advancing years. Let's move on. We have lots more to talk about. Sorry, Tony, I missed that.
I said you said it, not us.
Well, none of us are getting any younger, are we? The Auditor-General is looking at the financial management of a few councils. Selected Monash, Cardinia, East Gippsland, Greater Shepparton, and Yarra for one of its audits. I know some people out there are applauding this move from the Auditor-General because it may actually help bring more of a spotlight onto the financial challenges that councils around the state are experiencing. One comment I did see was some disappointment there wasn't a small rural shire in the list because they, of course, are doing it really, really tough while everyone else is perhaps just doing it tough. Thoughts on this, Julie, about the spotlight this is going to bring?
Yeah, look, I think there's going to be a spotlight on a few things. And my pick of the week this week also shows shining lights on local government. Look, it's not unusual to have this spotlight. Local government is probably the most seriously watched level of government in Australia by lots of integrity agencies. I don't know of any other organisation that has so many integrity agencies that keeps an eye on what's going on than local government. So not surprising. It's happened before. It's happening again. There's also some more light that's going to be reported through the Auditor-General, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But it's yeah, look, what can I say? It's just we're just so used to it now, and whether it's fair or not, I don't know. I just think that it's just an observation that it just continues to be so intense for local government in that space.
Yeah, the comment that's made in the narrative about why this audit is seen as important by the Auditor-General is that over the last 5 years, councils have consistently underspent and carried forward capital budgets by almost $3.8 billion. And while inflation and COVID-19 have compounded this problem, the consistent underspend also reflects issues with project delivery, budgeting and forecasting, some of which is picked up in some of those comments we were talking about in the Queenscliffe notice of motion earlier, Tony.
Yeah. Look, I think it's a welcome initiative. I think we should embrace this. It's not a threat to the sector. In fact, it's really, looking at the underlying viability and, any outcomes of such a review might potentially lead to more resource support for the sector. So I think it's a good thing that there's this level of independent scrutiny of the financial situation of a cross section of councils, as you say, perhaps not a small rural shire in there this time, but certainly a cross section otherwise.
Yeah.
And Chris, no doubt the Auditor-General will meet with the minister, if something is found that is of concern, and there will be communication across to state government about those issues. So I think you're right. You're both right in that, it could help the sector potentially in terms of understanding the level of funding that might be required going forward.
All right, we'll note that one. I note that the McPherson newspapers up in the northern part of the state are reporting that IBAC has chosen to pass on those two matters referred to it from the Moira Shire Council Commission inquiry. I haven't seen anything sort of official out of IBAC on this, but Jeff Adams, who I have had a lot to do with over the years, has obviously got his ear to the ground on this one, and has reported that the issue with contracts has been referred on to, the alleged issue, I should say, with contracts has been referred on to the inspectorate, and the allegations about asbestos dumping have been referred back to the administrators to deal with, and they have triggered an independent investigation. I know you were involved with the Commission of Inquiry, Tony, so there might be very little you can say, if anything.
Yeah, look, I'm, as you say, those reports haven't been confirmed. I wouldn't be, if it is the case that IBAC aren't proceeding with an investigation, that wouldn't surprise me, given what I know about that, what came out in that process. What I would say, though, is that, you know, if it's going to be the case that there are no charges laid for breaches of any legislation, no charges laid against any councillor, you know, and yet we've got councillors dismissed and administrators appointed for over 5 years in that shire, you know, that's if that's the standard we're going to follow, what does it mean for, say, a city of Casey, where there almost certainly will be criminal charges laid, one would think. You know, are they not going to have councillors for 10, 15 years, given you know, how onerous the, you know, the solution for Moira, you know, that the government thought was appropriate for Moira. You know, I really think it's worth reflecting back on whether such a long absence of democratic representation in Moira is the best outcome. Yeah. In these in circumstances, as I say, where there doesn't seem to have been, or at least today, it doesn't appear to be any charges being laid.
Well, we're waiting for that report on Operation Sandon, aren't we? Which could be any time. But I thought you were exaggerating. But Tony, you're probably right in terms of what might happen to Casey, because they've had administrators now for nearly as long as Moira will be without councillors by the time 2028 rolls around.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Chris, can I just note what the Chief Administrator, John Tanner, is doing there in relation to the remediation of the asbestos. So I was really pleased to see that he was looking at the 2 transfer stations and looking at plans for remediation at those transfer stations where there had been, you know, asbestos dumped. So, you know, good on John for tackling that issue head on and trying to do something about the, you know, environmental consequences of that. So, so I was really pleased to hear about that response.
Okay, probably enough said on that. Couple of other things to note briefly. I'm of two minds about whether to even bring this up. The annual, go on. Yeah, will I? Yeah, all right. The annual Herald Sun hatchet job on CEO salaries has done the rounds again. I think even worse this time, it's been picked up and amplified even more than usual by the nightly news, the commercial news networks. I'm told. I refuse to watch them, to be honest, because they just make me angry these days. But look, the same old lazy comparisons that are not relevant to the Premier, the Prime Minister, etc. Did either of you see this awful coverage? I know, I know I'm biased.
You see it every year, Chris. Yeah. It's like a broken record. And, you know, it was nice to be able to see that they had an incorrect photo in there of a CEO that's no longer a CEO in local government. Yeah. You know, it was nice to see that they actually didn't have up-to-date information in there. So it does sort of question the integrity of it a little bit. But, you know, again...
Well, I think, you know, in their defence, probably, Julie, they were reporting what... you're talking about Justin Hannay, who was the CEO of Melbourne. They were reporting probably what his last reported salary range was. So.
Yeah, but, you know, again, you know, not relevant for the city of Melbourne at the moment.
No.
So, yeah, look, again, a beat up. Tell me another service that you can... or tell me another organisation where you've got more than sort of 100, 150 services that you're delivering as a CEO, where, you know, where you've got potentially between 6 and 11, 12 councillors as your boss, tell me that that's, you know, not a complex CEO job to have and should be paid appropriately. And you know, to be able to get good people, you've got to pay. Look, I'm biased because I've been a CEO. You know,
Same
maybe
here.
you are too, Chris.
No,
But,
maybe about it. I certainly.
you know, again, it's like there's been no news on that day and they decide to target local government again. And of course, people would be horrified. Of course they would be. But, you know, I actually think that they earn every single cent that they work for, because it's a damn hard job. That's what I can say.
So Tony, we're biased, and I just get annoyed that it's just lazy reporting. Why don't you make some relevant comparisons? Get out of this comparing it to the Premier and the Prime Minister stuff, because it is not directly relevant in any way, shape or form.
Yeah, look, I certainly agree. It's about what you've got to pay to get the right people for the job, and you know, everything's got a context. If you compare CEO salaries to aged care workers and nurses who, you know, help save lives, you'd say, well, they're overpaid. You know, the nurses don't get enough. If you compare them to, you know, managing partners at law firms, you know, you're probably underpaid. But, you know, then again, we'd say we risk our own capital, and if we have a bad year, we don't get any money. But so you can't, this game of comparison to other contexts doesn't work. I think you've got to look at, as Julie says, you know, there's the responsibility for a large range of staff, services, and, you know, involved in, you know, serving the community and dealing with politicians in terms of councillors. I think, you know, it's just as you say, an easy story to make. And trotting out, councils will pay what they need to pay to get quality. And there's a competitive market. CEOs can go to the public service, they can go into the private industry. There's a competitive marketplace. There are advantages for working in local government over the private sector. There are disadvantages as well. So, you know, people measure that up. And one of the things that you consider is what's the remuneration. You also consider, you know, the satisfaction you get out of running a council. And I think that if you typically ask CEOs, there's a very high satisfaction level in being involved in the delivery of community services.
And you say that, sorry, go.
Sorry, I was going to say it's a high risk job too. You know, it's a short term contract, and it's also high risk in the sense that, you know, there can be a special meeting called of a council, and they can sack a CEO overnight. We saw that happen down at Warrnambool
without giving a reason.
Without giving a reason. So, you know, this is a high risk commitment. You know, we saw the Warrnambool CEO came from, I think, from Western Australia, moved his family out here, walked into that. Look, I'm not saying that, you know, it was all perfect, but I'm just saying that, you know,
well, the Supreme Court said it wasn't perfect.
Yeah, I put my lawyer hat on, say unfair dismissal doesn't apply to people over certain salaries typically. So most people who are on, you know, 200,000 plus, it can be dismissed and aren't subject to those unfair dismissal regimes, and it's just a contract argument. But yeah, I absolutely, I don't think CEOs are overpaid. Let me say that.
No, and you made the point about some CEOs leaving to go to the private sector. There's quite a few examples of that. They can go and earn more money, significantly more money in private sector roles, and be responsible for delivering one service. So, you know, let's have some proper comparisons in this argument and stop trotting out the same old spokespersons who've got their own barrow to push. Anyway, I didn't really want to go there.
I think we needed to get that off our chest.
I think we did too.
We needed to discuss it, even though we thought we didn't really want to give the Herald Sun any air on this. But yeah.
Let's meet again, same time, same place next year when the Herald Sun does its league table again. All right, we're going to have to wrap this up, and I had so much more. A couple of stories to look out for. Mount Gambier Council has just decided to develop a policy to outline how its relationships with state and federal politicians are handled. You might say that's an obvious thing, but apparently there's been some controversy there with the mayor having written a letter in support of a political candidate, and other councillors weren't too impressed about it not being apolitical. So check that out if you would like. Another councillor, Tony, has lost their position on a council in Tasmania, this time at Glenorchy, after missing 3 meetings in a row. Bit of a trend starting to happen here.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, that I think, if you don't show up to 3 meetings, you're effectively resigning, even if you don't put in your formal resignation, 3 consecutive meetings without leave. This council has a history of being suspended for bullying on social media. So I think the councillors effectively, left the building, and the formalities now are just of coming through in terms of declaring the vacancy.
So this Alderman Kelly Sims has described the decision as cruel because she's been sacked a month after her mother died, and she says she put in a formal request for leave and they decided to vote against it in a closed meeting. So there are 2 sides to every story, but the upshot of it is that there's an extraordinary vacancy there now, and she's lost her position. Just wanted to mention Indigo Shire this week passed a statement of support for LGBTIQ plus communities, and this was brought about particularly in the wake of the rural city of Wangaratta postponing a rainbow ball, which we talked about a month or so ago. Still a bit of disquiet about that decision, clearly. And on the other side of the coin, Melton City Council has chosen not to establish an LGBTIQ advisory committee in responding to a petition asking it to do just that. And it's gone a step further, Julie, and voted to ban the creation of any new community advisory committees until November next year, which of course is after the new council term starts.
It's an interesting decision, and yeah, I mean, I don't know how that's going to go down with the community. I mean, maybe what they're doing is focusing on, we've got the council plan, we've got all these things we need to deliver on, let's focus on getting those done between now and the end of the year. I'm just speculating, I don't know. But let's hope they come forward after the election and start to think about, where they need that advice from in the community. I mean, there's some really effective advisory committees out there that are doing a great job. I went and worked with a disability advisory committee out at Moonee Valley to help them understand local government, and they were so engaged, so relevant, so amazing in their contribution towards how they thought that local government could improve. So I think that we've got a lot to learn from these kind of committees or advisory committees. So I think council should be open and transparent and use these people to help understand how they can improve the services to those people. So
perhaps they got a bit concerned when they heard me talking on the roundup about what's happened in Perth, where we're an LGBTIQ advisory group that was formed after some unfortunate comments made by the Lord Mayor a couple of years ago, has racked up $52,000, I think it is, in legal fees in the last 12 months alone. And the council there has decided to restructure that group and bring it under staff management. So it doesn't always go the way you want it to, does it?
But are we being too risk averse in that space? It would be my question. It's not always going to end up down that road.
No. All right. Anything to add on that, Tony, before we go to picks of the week?
Oh, look, I saw Sean Mulcahy's comments from the Rainbow Local Government Alliance saying it was disappointing. Look, I concur. I know Sean had some dealings with Sean, and except that. Don't know what's behind it, but let's see what happens post elections. Will Melton create an advisory committee in this space then?
Yes. All right, let's quickly do the picks of the week. Tony, your pick of the week is out of Sydney. This is a former councillor who made headlines a few years ago and is back in the news.
Yeah, I think we can say Sydney's most infamous former deputy mayor, Salim Mahaja. The legal scandals continue.
He was the one with the wedding that made news.
Yes, remember the wedding in 2015 with the closed the public road. There was the white Lamborghini, the white Ferrari, the white Aston Martin. A year later, he got in trouble in relation to conflicts of interest. 2016 in relation to council decision to sell council-owned car park to some companies associated with the Mahaja family, and lack of declarations of conflicts of interest. That was in 16. In 2017, he's on the way to court to face an assault charge, assault on a taxi driver. Well, there's a staged car accident, isn't there? We saw the images of him on the paramedic trolley with the neck brace, and it turned out that accident was staged to avoid the court hearing and to get some sympathy, presumably. But he's back in court again, let me say. He's pleading not guilty, but these are charges in relation to allegedly forging the signature of his former lawyer in some federal court proceedings around insolvency of companies. Another charge about allegedly forging the signature of his sister. As I say, he's pled not guilty, but there seems to be, he's a bit of a frequent flyer when it comes to the courts, and he's probably one of those individuals who've kind of perhaps not cast local government in the best light.
No, and I noticed the judge has asked, I think the jury has retired to consider a verdict, and the judge has asked them to forget about any notoriety that they've felt towards this individual, saying it was irrelevant, as difficult as that may be. Thanks for that, Tony. Julie, your pick of the week is taking us back to that issue of financial management of councils we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, that's right. It goes broader than that, though, Chris. It actually is a new interactive dashboard that the Victorian Auditor-General's office have released. Now, local government is not new to dashboards, not new to comparisons, as you know, but they have released that now. So I think this week my focus is on transparency of local government, one of the key principles under the Local Government Act, as we know. So this allows the public to look at council's performance across multiple measures, again, not new, and they're reported under the Local Government Performance Framework. And it compares councils. You can see trends over time. So an interesting time to be releasing this. With the final year coming up, as you know, of the leading up to the election. I had to do it. I had a quick look at Geelong, and Ali might want to have a look at this. I had a look at governance, and it talks about community satisfaction, community consultation engagement. It's ranking around about 5 out of 10. Might need some work in that space. And looking at community satisfaction with council decisions, only ranked 3 out of 10 in similar councils, compared to similar councils. And council decisions made at meetings closed to the public, ranked 6 out of 10 in that space. So again, a little bit low for a council in comparison to similar type councils. So look, Ali has got her challenges there. There are some stats there that she might want to have a look at. But yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting tool. And I think that on social media, there's been some positive comments around, this is great, this is accountable, this is transparent, fantastic that we're seeing this available to the communities. Look.
So, Julie, is this filling a gap that's been created with the demise of the Know Your Council website?
I'm guessing that is the case, Chris, because it is very similar to what we've seen before. It covers off on things like animal management, maternal child health, sustainable capacity, statutory planning, which is always a hot topic to compare, roads, food safety, waste collection, library services, all the stuff we've seen before through the previous framework. So whether or not they've stopped it within the department, and now Vargo have picked it up to publish it. Maybe that's what has occurred. I'm not 100% sure, but it's not unlike what we've seen before. And they do reference, obviously, the local government performance reporting framework on the website. So worth a look by all councils, just to see where you're ranking and what you might need to focus on.
Anything to add there, Tony?
Yeah, I think it's useful. It's informative. You know, it's good information. I don't think the public should treat it as, you know, definitive of, you know, is their council worse than the council next door, because there's always a backstory and some reasons. But it's I think it's good to have this information available to the community and the sector broadly, and it's useful to have these kind of comparisons of similar councils, the mean in similar councils, etc. Yeah, it adds to the conversation, but I say I wouldn't like to see someone go, well, because that council's ranked at the bottom of the 79, it must be the worst council in the state on one single measure, you know.
All right, and at the risk of making this the longest running episode ever of TG, in fact, it probably already is, looking at the clock, my quick pick of the week is out of England. I've done this for you, Julie, because I know you love the UK stories. There's a growing concern there after the pandemic, when councils were allowed to hold you know, a lot of their meetings online. They've now reinstituted the requirement for certain meetings to be conducted in person, and 1 in 10 councils are now saying that council members are standing down because of that change, because they don't want to be tied to having to turn up in person, which is a concerning trend happening there. Makes me wonder whether any of the councillor resignations we've seen in recent times here have been related in any way to the move back to in-person meetings. What did you make of this, Julie?
I think you're right. I think a lot of people, particularly councillors and even staff, have got really, really used to that you know, flexibility of working from home. And so to all of a sudden change that, and, you know, maybe people are feeling more vulnerable, maybe because of some of the things that are going on.
Good point.
Some of these council meetings, there might be a bit of targeting of councils. They might feel more protected behind the screen. So, and people are feeling much safer behind the screen generally, I think. So whether it's to do with that, I don't know. Personal circumstances, maybe to do with, you know, better flexibility. I don't really know. But yeah, it's interesting that they're quitting because of it. So it says to me that there's some deep-seated potential issues there for those particular councillors. Right. Yeah, that's my take.
You can find that story on the BBC, and I will be covering that on the next edition of the Roundup if you want to chase down the link for that in the transcript. We might draw a line under it there, folks. That's been a great discussion. Now, if you as a listener or viewer have made it this far in this week's edition of TG, let us know. Drop us a comment on YouTube or any of the socials. Or if you've got any of our emails, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know where you're listening or watching from, because I think anecdotally, Julie and Tony, you're getting a lot of people say they watch and listen in various ways, and it'd be nice to start collating some of that feedback, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be great, Chris. I'm just worried that maybe this week, you know, people spending so much time trying to get Taylor Swift tickets for their children might have taken over from, you know, from the time that they've spent listening to our podcast.
What time was that happening? Was that like 10 o'clock or something, was it?
Oh, it was throughout the week, you know, special.
Yeah, I know there was another show released, and there was another batch of tickets today being Friday morning as we record this. So
yeah, look, it's just dominated the whole of this week. So Melbourne's going to be pumping when Tay-Tay comes out.
It sure is. It sure is. Did you get your tickets, Tony?
I'll shake it off.
You've shaken it off. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to give him the opportunity to use that terribly predictable pun. All right. Let's wrap it up there and say thank you to Tony Ranick from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, our sponsors, and for your insights as always. Tony, have a great week ahead.
Thank you. And
Julie Reid from Julie A. Reid and Associates, thank you as always. Hope you have a great week too, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again back here on the TGU set in another week's time. Thanks to our viewers, listeners on YouTube and podcast. We'll see you again very soon from VLGA Connect. It's bye for now.